Have you ever reached a moment where the weight on your heart became so heavy that you wondered if anyone could truly hold you together? A moment when the people you depended on drifted away, when the support you expected disappeared, and when the strength you always carried suddenly felt too thin to stand on. Every woman who walks through a season of breaking eventually faces a sobering revelation. When everything else fails, only God sustains her. It is not a theory, not an idea, not a religious phrase. It is a truth discovered in the quiet collapse behind closed doors. It is learned when the tears fall without permission and the silence answers louder than comfort. There is a sacred point in a woman's journey where she realizes that no human hand can reach the depth of her wound. No relationship can heal what has been bruised in her spirit. No reassurance can fill the empty spaces that life carved inside her. And when she arrives at that moment, something profound happens. The illusion of control breaks. The pressure to stay strong cracks, and suddenly she can finally see that God was never asking her to carry everything alone. He was waiting for her surrender, waiting for the moment she stopped searching for strength around her and started discovering strength within her, the strength that he placed there long before the storm began. This awakening rarely feels gentle. It often begins in heartbreak, betrayal, emotional exhaustion, or a silent battle that no one else sees. But it is in that hidden place where everything familiar collapses that God becomes undeniable. His presence becomes more real than the disappointment. His voice becomes more stable than the chaos. His peace becomes the anchor that keeps her from sinking, and slowly she realizes that what she thought was breaking her was actually leading her to the one who could rebuild her from the inside out. You may have passed through this season, or may even be standing in it right now. If so, let this truth settle into your spirit. When God allows the weight to increase, it is because He is preparing to reveal the foundation that never breaks. When He removes what you thought you needed, He is making room for what you truly need. And when He becomes your only source, you discover a strength that cannot be shaken. And as you reflect on this, share in the comments if this speaks to a chapter you have walked through, because your voice may lift someone who feels unseen right now. Make sure you leave a like and check whether you are subscribed, so you continue receiving messages that strengthen your faith and deepen your understanding of how God sustains you. This journey is only beginning, and where it leads next will unfold a deeper revelation of what happens when a woman finally discovers that only God can hold her together. When a woman reaches the point where she realizes that only God can hold her together, something shifts in the atmosphere around her. The world may not notice it immediately, but internally a restructuring begins. It is subtle at first, almost invisible, like the quiet settling of the soul after a long storm. Yet within her, a new awareness rises. The strength she once borrowed from circumstances, people, and temporary affirmations was never meant to sustain her in the first place. This is the moment when God begins to reveal what has been hidden beneath years of self-reliance, emotional pressure, and silent expectations that she carried without complaint. And suddenly, she starts to recognize that the collapse she feared was actually the path to clarity. Because when the emotional scaffolding falls away, when the voices that once guided her fade, and when every external support weakens, a deeper truth emerges. God is not simply present, He becomes essential. He becomes the steady pulse beneath her uncertainty, the quiet reassurance behind her questions, the anchor beneath the waves that threaten to pull her into despair. And in this raw, unguarded state, God begins to show her what human strength could never reveal, that setbacks are often invitations into deeper intimacy, and that the moments she believed would destroy her are often the exact moments that transform her. This transformation does not happen in an instant. It unfolds in layers, often through experiences that seem ordinary but carry divine fingerprints. She may wake up one morning realizing that the anxiety that once consumed her now seems lighter, not because the situation has changed, but because she has. She may face a familiar challenge, yet respond with a calm she cannot explain. She may find herself letting go of fears that once dictated every decision, choosing instead to lean into a peace that feels strangely foreign and profoundly familiar at the same time. These are the signs of spiritual restructuring, the gentle evidence that God is becoming the source she never knew she needed so desperately. And as her perspective shifts, she begins to see that the people who left were not taking stability with them. They were making room for the stability God was preparing within her. The disappointments she carried for years begin to lose their weight, not because they become smaller, but because her spirit grows stronger. She starts to understand that the strength she sought from the world was always temporary, while the strength God gives is built to endure seasons, battles, losses, and even the moments she thought would break her. And in this realization, she finds herself standing at the threshold of a deeper journey, one that will continue to unfold as she learns what it truly means to be sustained not by the world, but by the one who never fails. As this internal transformation deepens, a woman begins to notice something she once overlooked. When God starts sustaining her, He often removes the support she never realized she depended on. It is rarely dramatic. It happens in small shifts, subtle distances, fading, conversations, and changes she cannot fully explain. People she once leaned on become less present. Relationships she thought were essential feel less stable. The emotional pillars she built her life upon no longer hold the same strength. And while this can feel unsettling, even painful, it carries a purpose that becomes clearer with time. God is not punishing her. He is repositioning her. He is drawing her away from sources that cannot hold her, so He can anchor her in the only source that can. This recalibration often feels like loss at first. She may wonder why certain people suddenly withdraw, or why circumstances she counted on begin to shift without warning. She may try to hold everything together, only to discover that the harder she tries, the more things seem to slip through her fingers. But what appears to be falling apart is often being gently dismantled by divine hands, because God knows that if she continues relying on what is unstable, she will never step into the strength He designed for her. He allows temporary supports to fade so that she can discover the permanence of His presence. In this season, God also confronts the deeper attachments she formed without realizing it. The desire for approval, the fear of disappointing others, the habit of carrying burdens alone, the instinct to fix everything for everyone before addressing her own needs. These behaviors, once seen as signs of resilience, begin to feel heavy, even draining. And this heaviness is not a sign of weakness. It is a signal. It is God showing her that the strength she once celebrated was often a shield hiding exhaustion. It was a survival method, not a spiritual foundation. Now He is inviting her to release it. She begins to sense that dependence on God is not a desperate act, but a deliberate choice. It is not a retreat from responsibility, but a return to alignment. She discovers that surrender is not losing control but restoring balance, and as she lets go of the pressure to sustain herself, she makes room for God to rebuild her in ways she did not imagine. Her thoughts become clearer, her emotions settle, her decisions feel guided rather than reactive. She learns to pause, breathe, and listen for the quiet direction that comes from within, where God has begun to speak louder than her fears. And slowly she realizes that what she once perceived as abandonment was actually divine protection. What felt like instability was restructuring. What looked like loneliness was preparation for deeper connection with God. This awareness places her at the edge of a new kind of strength, one that is no longer built on striving, managing, or controlling, but on trusting the one who is now lifting her from the inside out. As God continues this quiet rebuilding within her, something even more profound begins to unfold. The breaking that once felt like devastation becomes the very doorway to intimacy with Him. The moments she once tried to escape now carry meaning. The wounds she wished would disappear start revealing wisdom she never expected, and the silence that once frightened her becomes a place where she finally hears God without distraction. This process of spiritual breaking does not shatter her identity. It shapes it. It refines her. It strips away what was superficial so that what remains is authentic, grounded, and unshakably connected to God. In this stage, the woman begins to see her pain differently. She no longer views it as a punishment, but as a sacred invitation. The places where she once felt abandoned become the very places where she experiences divine nearness. The tears she shed in exhaustion now feel like prayers carried upward. Her weaknesses, which she once hid, become the areas where God teaches her what true strength looks like, and the vulnerability she resisted becomes the space where healing begins. She starts noticing that the more she releases, the more God restores, often in ways completely unlike what she imagined. This breaking also exposes the illusions she carried for years, the belief that she had to stay strong for everyone, the pressure to never fall apart, the idea that she could only be loved when she was unbroken. These beliefs begin to dissolve as the truth settles in. God never required perfection from her, only openness. He never demanded that she hold herself together, only that she allow Him to hold what she could not. And in that realization, the tight grip she once held on her own life begins to loosen. Her heart grows softer, not weaker. Her spirit grows quieter, not defeated. Her inner world grows more stable, not by removing storms, but by discovering the one who stands with her inside them. She learns that brokenness is not an ending, but a starting point, a spiritual reset that reveals who she truly is beneath the layers she once used to survive. She senses God rebuilding her identity not on external expectations, but on eternal truth, restoring the parts of her that she thought were beyond repair. And in this sacred reconstruction, she begins to experience a new kind of strength, a strength that does not scream, but stands, a strength that does not perform, but persists, a strength that does not rely on applause, but on alignment. This is the strength born from surrender, the strength that emerges when a woman discovers that intimacy with God is not found in avoiding pain, but in allowing Him to meet her within it. If any part of this speaks to something you have walked through, share your thoughts in the comments, because your voice may become the very encouragement another woman needs to keep going. As this inner awakening expands, the woman begins to recognize how God uses solitude and silence not as empty spaces, but as sacred ground for reconstruction. What once felt like abandonment slowly reveals itself as alignment. The quiet moments she used to fear become essential, allowing her to hear what constant noise had drowned out. In the stillness, she begins to sense that God is not merely watching her journey from a distance. He is actively reshaping her identity, peeling back layers that were shaped by pressure, expectations, disappointments, and old stories she no longer needs to carry. The solitude becomes a mirror where she sees herself with clarity for the first time. It is here, in the silence, that God begins to reorder her inner world. He gently confronts the beliefs she formed in survival mode, beliefs that told her she was too much, not enough, always responsible, never allowed to rest. He touches the memories that hardened her heart, not to reopen old wounds, but to heal them from the inside out. And as he does, a softening begins. A different kind of confidence emerges, not built on performance or validation, but on quiet knowing. She starts to understand that identity is not constructed through external affirmation. It is found in the presence of the one who formed her. During this process, she also discovers that God often strips away what she thought she needed so that he can return to her what she truly lost: herself. The version of her that existed before the disappointments, before the betrayals, before she carried burdens that were never meant for her shoulders. She notices how, little by little, the silence becomes a place of restoration. Where anxiety once dominated her thoughts, she now senses unexpected peace. Where insecurity once spoke loudly, she now hears truth rising within her. Where exhaustion once shaped every decision, she now feels a grounding steadiness that is not her own. These internal shifts begin influencing how she moves through the world. She becomes more intentional with her boundaries, not out of fear but out of wisdom. She becomes less reactive and more discerning. She learns to protect her spirit without hardening her heart. She becomes comfortable withdrawing when needed, not as an escape, but as a return to the presence that strengthens her. And slowly, she realizes that solitude is not loneliness. It is preparation. It is where God trains her spirit to stand firm, even when emotions fluctuate. As this transformation settles deeper into her, she begins to walk with a quiet assurance that she is not defined by who left, what changed, or what was lost. She is defined by the God who meets her in silence and rebuilds her from within. And without fully noticing it yet, she is becoming the woman who will rise stronger in the next chapters of her journey, guided by a strength she no longer needs to manufacture. As God continues reshaping her from within, something else begins to unfold. Her relationships, priorities, and expectations start to shift in ways she never anticipated. It is not that she stops loving people or loses interest in connection. Rather, she becomes more aware of what is healthy for her spirit. God begins redefining the spaces where she invests her energy, revealing that some relationships were built on emotional habits rather than spiritual alignment. She starts to notice which connections drain her and which connections strengthen her, which conversations leave her empty and which draw her closer to the peace she has been cultivating. These realizations may be uncomfortable, but they mark the beginning of a deeper awakening. Her heart becomes more discerning. The woman who once felt obligated to carry the emotional weight of everyone around her now senses a gentle conviction. Not every relationship is meant to be held, and not every request is meant to be answered. She realizes that being needed is not the same as being valued, and being helpful is not the same as being whole. God begins showing her that some of the people she fought to keep were never meant to stay, not because they were bad, but because they could not walk with her to the places He is leading her. This is not rejection, it is redirection. And as these shifts occur, she begins to understand that God is protecting her future by refining her present. This internal recalibration also affects her priorities. She becomes less driven by urgency and more guided by purpose. The things that once felt important begin to lose their grip, making room for what truly matters. She starts choosing peace over approval, rest over constant striving, and truth over temporary comfort. She stops apologizing for needing space, clarity, or time with God. Instead, she begins to honor her spiritual boundaries, treating them not as limitations, but as sacred responsibilities, and in doing so, she discovers a level of freedom she did not know was possible. Expectation is another area where God does His deepest work. The expectations she once placed on relationships, on circumstances, and even on herself begin to loosen. She no longer looks to others to fill the emotional gaps that only God can sustain. She no longer expects people to carry burdens that were never theirs to hold. She stops demanding perfection from herself and starts embracing the process of becoming. This shift allows her to experience relationships with more grace, less pressure, and deeper authenticity. Through all these changes, she begins to recognize that God is not merely adjusting her external world. He is aligning her internal one. Her new strength is not loud or forceful. It is steady, rooted, calm, and quietly resilient. It is the kind of strength that allows her to stand firm, even when circumstances fluctuate. It is the kind of strength that emerges only when a woman discovers that her identity, her peace, and her purpose are sustained not by people, but by God alone. As these internal and external alignments unfold, something powerful begins to rise within her. A quiet, unshakable inner strength that does not come from effort, confidence, or emotional resilience, but from her deepening dependence on God. This strength is different from the one she displayed for years. It is not the strength of pretending everything is fine, nor the strength of holding herself together by sheer will. It is the kind of strength that grows in the unseen places, born from surrender, shaped in silence, and nurtured in the presence of the one who sustains her. It is a strength that does not shout to prove itself. It simply stands. This inner strength becomes evident in the way she responds to life. Situations that once triggered fear now invite reflection. Challenges that would have overwhelmed her begin to feel navigable. The emotional storms that once shook her now lose their power to define her. She becomes anchored in something deeper than circumstance, deeper than emotion, deeper than understanding. She becomes anchored in God. And this grounding gives her a stability she did not know she could possess. Her heart, once fragile and easily shaken, becomes steady. Not because life is easier, but because her foundation has changed. She also begins to notice a new clarity emerging within her. Where confusion once clouded her decisions, she now senses direction. Where insecurity once dictated her choices, she now feels assurance. Where exhaustion once dominated her days, she now experiences a replenishing strength that cannot be explained by natural means. This clarity is not the absence of uncertainty. It is the presence of God guiding her through it. It is the realization that she does not walk alone, and therefore she does not crumble when life shifts beneath her feet. This transformation reaches into her emotional world as well. The woman who once gave away her peace too easily now protects it. The woman who once allowed others to determine her worth now holds her value with conviction. The woman who once feared being alone now recognizes solitude as a place of communion rather than emptiness. She becomes more aware of her identity, more confident in her voice, and more attuned to the movements of God within her spirit. This awareness fuels the resilience she carries into every step forward. And as this inner strength becomes woven into her identity, she realizes something profound. Relying on God did not make her weaker, it made her whole. Depending on Him did not diminish her independence, it refined her wisdom. Trusting Him did not limit her, it liberated her. She rises not because she avoided pain, but because she learned where true strength is born. If any part of this resonates with your journey, feel free to share your experience in the comments, because your reflection may become the reassurance someone else desperately needs today. As this renewed strength settles into her spirit, another transformation begins unfolding quietly within her, an emotional and spiritual rebirth. It does not arrive all at once, nor does it announce itself with dramatic signs. Instead, it rises slowly, like light filtering through the cracks of a once darkened room. She begins to sense that the woman she was before no longer fits the woman she is becoming. The fears that once controlled her steps begin to loosen their grip. The insecurities that once dictated her expectations start losing their authority. Something inside her is awakening, not from sheer determination, but from a deep and growing certainty that God is shaping her for something beyond what she has known. This rebirth shows itself first in her emotional world. The heavy weight she carried for so long begins to lift, not because her circumstances have changed, but because her perspective has. She starts seeing her past with compassion rather than shame. She begins to understand that the pain she endured was not wasted. It was molding her, refining her, sharpening her discernment, and deepening her capacity for understanding. The emotions that once overwhelmed her now become gateways to insight. Instead of drowning in them, she learns to navigate them with a newfound steadiness that comes from trusting God rather than her own strength. Spiritually, the shift becomes even more profound. She starts to recognize God not only as her sustainer, but as her guide, her teacher, her companion in every hidden place of her heart. Moments that once felt random now appear intentional. Encounters that once felt ordinary take on new meaning. She senses patterns, nudges, and whispers that guide her in ways she never noticed before. God's presence becomes the backdrop of her thoughts, the grounding force behind her decisions, and the quiet reassurance whenever doubt tries to return. She begins living with an awareness that she is held, led, and deeply known. This awakening also reshapes her relationship with herself. The woman who once apologized for her needs now honors them. The woman who once silenced her voice now speaks with a calm conviction. The woman who once feared losing love now understands that her worth was never rooted in who stayed or who left. She becomes more patient with her process, more protective of her peace, and more aligned with the truth God continues revealing within her. She no longer measures herself by old wounds, but by the growth that emerged from them. Through this rebirth, she discovers that God was not merely healing her. He was rewriting her identity from the inside out. She realizes that what she thought was an ending was actually an emergence. The resilience she carries now is different from the survival mode she once lived in. It is softer, deeper, more grounded, and this transformation prepares her for what comes next. Stepping into a purpose that can only be embraced by someone who has learned what it means to be held by God rather than carried by the world. As this spiritual and emotional rebirth matures within her, another realization begins to take shape. Everything God allowed, everything He removed, everything He exposed, and everything He rebuilt was preparing her for purpose. Not the kind of purpose defined by achievements or outward results, but a deeper calling that grows from the very places where she once felt weakest. She starts to understand that the seasons she feared were breaking her were actually shaping her into someone capable of carrying wisdom, compassion, and clarity that she did not possess before. Her journey was never random. It was intentional refinement. This understanding begins with subtle insights. She notices that the experiences that once caused her shame now equip her to support others with authenticity. The moments she spent questioning her worth now help her recognize the places where others are silently struggling. The emotional valleys she walked through give her the ability to speak into darkness with honesty and empathy. She realizes that the growth she assumed was invisible was actually building a foundation strong enough to hold the weight of what God is calling her toward. Purpose also reveals itself in how she begins to move differently. She becomes less reactive and more discerning, not out of fear, but out of alignment. She no longer seeks validation from the outside because her spirit has been anchored on the inside. Decisions that once overwhelmed her now feel guided. Doors she once tried to force open no longer interest her. Instead, she feels drawn toward choices that reflect the peace God has cultivated within her. She recognizes that divine direction is rarely loud. It is gentle, steady, persistent, and unmistakable once she learns to listen. She also begins to see the patterns in her past, not as accidents, but as preparation. The relationships that challenged her boundaries taught her where to draw lines. The disappointments that broke her expectations taught her where not to place her hope. The seasons of silence trained her to hear God's voice above her fears. And the moments of surrender taught her that strength is not measured by how tightly she holds on, but by how freely she lets God take the lead. All of it fits together with a precision that only hindsight can reveal. As these revelations deepen, she realizes she is no longer the woman who walked into her pain. She is no longer defined by what happened to her or by what she lost. Instead, she is defined by the God who sustained her through every unseen battle. She feels a quiet shift, a sense of empowerment rooted not in self-reliance, but in spiritual clarity. She begins to recognize that the purpose emerging from her transformation is not something she must chase. It is something she will grow into, step by step, as she continues allowing God to guide her more than her fears, expectations, or past experiences ever did. And although she may not see the full picture yet, she senses that she is standing on the threshold of a new chapter, one shaped not by survival, but by intention, alignment, and the profound truth that being sustained by God prepares her for far more than she once believed possible. As her journey unfolds into this new chapter, she begins to understand that being sustained by God does more than restore her strength. It reshapes the entire direction of her life. She moves through her days with a sense of grounding that does not depend on circumstances. The fears that once pulled her backward now serve as reminders of how far she has come. Decisions feel clearer, not because she has all the answers, but because she trusts the one who guides her. She no longer walks from a place of desperation, but from a place of quiet confidence. And this confidence is not loud or forceful. It is steady, born from the awareness that she is held, strengthened, and directed by a God who has walked with her through every silent tear and every hidden battle. This new way of living also brings a deeper sense of purpose. She notices that her words carry more weight, her presence brings more peace, and her choices reflect a woman who is no longer trying to fix everything around her, but instead is aligned with what strengthens her within. She becomes intentional about where she invests her heart, who she allows into her inner world, and what she chooses to say yes or no to. Her boundaries become expressions of wisdom rather than fear. Her growth becomes an offering rather than a defense. And slowly she realizes that the woman she has become is not the result of survival, but of surrender. Even more, she begins to recognize that God has been preparing her not just to heal, but to live fully, to step into relationships, dreams, and responsibilities with a heart that no longer breaks under the weight of expectation, to embrace opportunities that once felt too overwhelming, to trust herself again, not because she is flawless, but because she finally understands who sustains her. Her journey becomes a reflection of restoration, not perfection, a reminder that transformation is not a single moment, but a continuous unfolding guided by divine hands. As she walks forward, she is aware that the road ahead will still have challenges, but she no longer fears them. She knows, now that every step she takes is supported by the same God who strengthened her through her most fragile moments. And this awareness gives her a sense of freedom she never imagined possible. She moves with purpose, with clarity, with grace, carrying the quiet strength of someone who finally understands that God's sustaining power is not a safety net, but a foundation. If this journey has resonated with you in any way, you are welcome to share a comment saying something like, "This message was for me," to mark that you walked with me until the end of this reflection. And if the words you heard today brought clarity or peace, feel free to subscribe so you can continue receiving messages that speak to your spirit. A like on the video also helps strengthen this space we are building together. And if you feel ready to keep going, there is another video right here that continues this path in a way that might surprise you. So take a moment and follow this next step with me, letting your heart stay open to what comes next.